Before I hand over tonight to our MC for this evening, Jacob Kagi from the ABC and an old saint from the class of 2009? 2009? Yep. I would like to explain the format of this event. Each speaker will stand up and speak for about 2 minutes about themselves, their party, or why they chose to run for the seat. In the interest of fairness, a bell will be rung at 1 minute 45 seconds, so each candidate knows they have to quickly wrap it up. Once this is finished, Jacob will then invite you, as the audience, to ask questions of the candidates. Please remember to keep your questions respectful and very brief so we can get around to as many people as possible. Answers from the candidates will also be limited to 1 minute each. We also have here tonight a local author who's selling copies of his very topical Tom Clancy-style novel called Succession, a thriller about WA seceding from the Union amongst conflict with our neighbours in the north and to the east. It's worth a read if you'd like to grab a copy after this event. I'd like to also acknowledge the fact that we've got almost every candidate here tonight. The WA Exit Party or WAGSIT Party, the candidate is either withdrawn or he's FIFO and can't reconcile his hours with tonight, certainly, maybe when running for the seat. And the Greens candidate couldn't commit to this evening, hence why we have the upper house candidate, Brad Pettitt. Otherwise, everyone's running for the lower house seat. Anyway, thank you very much for your attendance here tonight, and over to Jacob.
Hello everyone, thank you very much for joining us this evening. We hope it will be an informative night for you, help you make the most informed vote possible you can here in this state election, just 11 days away now. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Jacob Kagi. As Ben mentioned, I went to All Saints for 13 years in the end and left in 2009. Now I dabble in work with the ABC, covering state politics. Be hosting the event for tonight and hope to get questions from as many of you as possible and hear from the audience and of course all the candidates as we go along. I thought just a little bit of background about the Seat of Riverton before we start. For those of you who don't know, it includes the suburbs of Rossmoyne, Shelley, Riverton, Bull Creek, Willerton, and then parts of Brentwood and Leeming as well. It's existed since 1989, so that's 8 different elections before now that it's been fought in. Only 2 parties have ever won it, the Liberals on 6 occasions, Labor on 2. Most recently, the Liberals won it by about 4% 4 years ago. So we're going to start hearing from all the candidates now. We're going to go around the room as we get things started. As Ben mentioned, we'll get about 2 minutes from each candidate, and then we'll head on to questions. So the first candidate we're going to hear from is Dina Gawa from the Australian Christians. Dina, over to you.
Thank you for that. I kind of knew I was going to go first. But anyway, welcome everyone. Thanks for coming tonight. Kaya nunakut wanju ninja nunga buja. Hello everyone and welcome to Noongar country. I am Dena Gower, a Wajak, Balladong and Wilman woman, a mother, grandmother, great-grandmother and a community leader. I stand for Australian Christians, for faith, family and freedom. We believe there are many people in Australia who would welcome a Christian voice amidst the voice of Parliament, currently shaping new laws. We believe there are many people. Our goal is to see members of Parliament and senators elected so that we can support and promote policies that value families' faith and freedom. Our aim is to work alongside other MPs and senators to build a healthy and thriving communities in our beautiful state. We believe in freedom of religion and the attendant freedoms of expression, association and thought. We believe all Australians should have the right to refuse to perform an act that would violate their conscience. We need to be free to live out our beliefs and without penalty. To live according to conscience is an individual's most sacred right. We believe that religion freedom should be broadened rather than restricted. We believe that the Bible provided the philosophical basis for Australians of freedom of religion and conscience. We believe in one eternal God, self-existing in 3 persons, Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit. We believe in the Lord Jesus Christ as the only Saviour of humanity from sin. We believe the Holy Bible to be the inspired, inerrant written word of God and the final authority in all matters, above human laws and government. We believe in our God there is hope, freedom and love, and most importantly, the power of answered prayer. We believe that people need both material and spiritual needs, and our government needs to run in a way that meets both of these needs. By putting these values back in Parliament and in society and public life, our Christian values keep this country, now called Australia, safe and gives us hope and love. And we must not let them be pushed aside. Our families, we promote strong and stable and healthy families and children brought up in God's values. That will be the foundation of a strong, united community. Thank you.
Thank you for that. We'll now move to our second candidate from the Liberal Democrats, Chris Holman. And candidates, if we can just ask you to try to keep these to 2 minutes, that would be superb. Thank you.
No worries, I'll do my best to be brief-ish. Hi, I'm Chris Holman. I'm the Liberal Democrat candidate for Riverton. A little bit about me. I've been a resident in Willerton for over 15 years, and my wife's family goes back over 40 years in the community. With my wife, I run a small business where we employ some wonderful local Western Australians. I'm also a lifelong, until recently, Liberal voter, where I just became, I guess, disenchanted with the Liberal Party, the direction it was heading, certainly federally and also at a state level as well. So, yeah, I started looking around at other options, looked at the minor parties, and I chose the Liberal Democrats because their values and their policies really matched closely with what I believe myself. So that's one of the reasons I'm here tonight, wide-eyed first time. So one of our jobs as a minor party is to keep the major parties honest. We need to make sure they're held accountable and that government is transparent, and that when they're spending our tax dollars, they don't think they've got a blank cheque to do whatever they want. So yeah, speaking of tax dollars, that's one thing I am, I guess, as a Liberal Democrat against in principle, is punitive and pointless taxation, like payroll tax, which is just a hindrance to business, stamp duty, which impacts first home buyers, well, any home buyers really. So we're going to be fighting to get rid of those taxes, and we'll be fighting to free up police resources as well that are currently being used for revenue raising activities, other things that are non-core. We want them back into community policing, back into making our streets safer, back into protecting us from home invasions, other violent crimes, things like that. So on that cheery note, I'll wind it up. Thank you for your time, and look forward to any questions you may have.
Thank you, Chris. Next up, we have from the Labor Party, Dr. Jagadish Krishnan.
Good evening, everyone. First of all, can I acknowledge the traditional owners of the land, the Wajak people of the Noongar Nation, and pay my respects to their elders past, present, and emerging. I am honored and humbled to be here as a candidate for Labor, representing the people of Riverton. Like many folks in Riverton, I'm a migrant who moved to Australia in 2006 with my wife Yamini and the 2 kids. What a great opportunity. I was able to progress in my career as a GP. Apart from that, I felt so proud to be serving the community day in and day out. I was able to provide my kids with the best education in the world, because there was equal opportunity provided here in Western Australia. That's what I stand for. Fortunately, I was able to further progress to be a business person, establishing medical centers, providing service to the people, including the 2 COVID clinics funded by the Commonwealth government. I'm proud to say I was in the front line during the COVID time to be able to provide service to the people. Running a small business is not easy, and I understand the pains of moms and dads who own small businesses. And I can understand the stress and the trouble the family takes in running a small family business. I'm very fortunate to work under the leadership of Premier Mark McGowan, who has proven to be one of the best world leaders keeping us safe and strong. I look forward to working with the Riverton community and deliver the plan for Riverton. Thank you all for being here this evening. Look forward to working with you in the future.
Thank you again. Now, next up from the Western Australian Party, we have Terry Lee. Terry?
Name is Terry Lee, representing the Western Australian Party for the electorate of Riverton. I have been a financial advisor for the last 32 years, working out from my office in Mount Pleasant. The reason why I'm up here today or tonight is to make a difference. So what I've observed is that a lot of our instructions are always, the agenda were always handed over from the eastern states. We joke about the wise men of the East. And somehow or other, we don't seem to be able to benefit utilizing our resources, our people's skill to further the interests of Western Australia. I know it's been sort of hammered to death about getting the best deal for us, getting back the GST and eradicating stamp duty and maybe even eradicating the payroll tax. So what I'm trying to say on behalf of my party is we need to make Western Australia prosperous and put West Australians first. And we are sick and tired of, I think you would be bored to death with all this sort of bartering about how much we should get back. And I look at the latest statistics, 1.9% we got back Commonwealth revenue, which we should be entitled to at least 11%. So why not you put Western Australia interests ahead instead of just relying on the two major parties who surprisingly or unfortunately are Eastern state-centric, and they're always self-serving and they never listen to the voters. So that's why we have sort of a dysfunctional electoral system. Thank you very much.
Now, next up for the Greens, we have Brad Pettitt. Now, Brad is the Greens' upper house candidate for the South Metropolitan region. He's here in place of the Riverton candidate, Simon Blackburn, who couldn't be here this evening. Brad?
Thank you, Jacob. Yes, and Simon does send his apologies, and thank you for allowing me to step in. I also like to start by acknowledging that we are on Wajak Noongar land and pay my respects to elders past and present. Really good to be here and talk a little bit about what the party stands for. I actually ran for the seat of Riverton in 1996, just to show my age. Obviously, I didn't win, but not nice to be back here again. And just a little bit about me. Actually worked in the area for much of the time. I've worked at Murdoch University, where I was the Dean of the School of Sustainability for several years before I became Mayor of the City of Fremantle, where I've been the Mayor for the last 11 and a half years. So, and I'm now looking forward to taking some of those ideas that we've been doing in that part of the world, hopefully into the state parliament. The Greens this election are really clear around some of our priorities that we think need to be part of the conversation. At the heart of those is undoubtedly climate change. I think this is probably, as President Biden put it recently, this is the existential threat to us as a society, and one which Western Australia has a really important role to play, and I think a really positive role to play if we get it right. There is huge opportunity around creating green jobs, and a manufacturing sector based on renewable energy going forward, green hydrogen and the like. And I think at the moment, it's going to, what it requires though is political leadership and political support to make these kind of things happen. So I'll put climate change up there as one of the key issues we want to see much stronger action on. I'll put housing and homelessness probably up there as another really key issue as well. These are the kind of things that I'm passionate about, that I've been working for decades on, and I really am excited about. We appreciate, I think as Liberals have said, the McGowan government will win this election, but in the upper house, having people like the Greens and others who can actually make Labor better, I think will be really important for this parliament. So thank you, and I look forward to your questions.
Brad. Now, next up we have from the No Mandatory Vaccination Party, Penny Scull. Penny?
Hello, Riverton and friends. Allow me to outline the 4 simple policies of the No Mandatory Vaccination Party. Number 1, we will repeal Section 158 of the 2016 Public Health Act. I recommend you read it. 2, it will no longer be permissible for businesses or companies to insist that a present or prospective employee receive a vaccine as a condition of employment. 3, we will ensure that no child is forced to receive a vaccine in order to attend school or daycare. 4, we will reintroduce the right to conscientious objection, which represents the right of informed consent, which is in fact protected by our social contract, our Constitution, and the Bill of Rights. I would like to mention, if I may, that calling the No Mandatory Vaccination Party the anti-vax tinfoil hat party comes across as a deliberate attempt to deflect people's attention from the very real threat we are facing regarding our freedom of choice. Truth will always be my guiding light. Mainstream media narratives, outdated scientific dogma, and corporate bias are not honouring the objective process of informed consent. Irregardless of the medical intervention we are talking about, there is always the presence of risk. Where there is risk, there must be choice. The idea of an individual being forced to receive medical intervention through physical force, or that parents can be coerced into vaccinating their children through penalising government policy, is a disgrace. This party does not seek to prevent people's access to vaccines. It seeks simply to restore the protected freedom of informed consent for everyone. Thank you.
Now, finally, from the Liberal Party, Anthony Spagnolo.
I should stand, I think. Hi everyone, my name's Anthony Spagnolo. I'm the Liberal Party candidate for Riverton. Thank you all for being here tonight and taking interest in what happens in your local community. I'm sure you all had other things you could have been doing, but the fact you're here says something about you, and I just want to recognise that and say thank you. About me, I'm a local boy. I grew up in this area. I went to Corpus Christi College in high school, played for the Bull Creek Leeming Footy Club growing up, and I live locally with my wife, Abigail. And I think being a local is really important. It means I shop at the same shopping centres as you, I drive on the same roads that you drive on, which means I understand issues better than you do. And it means when I'm standing for election, I can focus on the issues that matter most to people in this community. So I'm really proud of that. I think it's really, really important. And of course, on this stage tonight, there are only 2 of the 7 candidates that actually live locally in the electorate. It's something for you to think about when you vote. The other thing I bring, besides a strong local connection, is senior government experience. My most recent job, before being the Liberal candidate in Riverton, was working for the Australian government as a senior budget advisor. And I worked on the last federal budget and the July economic financial update, both which contain the substantive response from the federal government to COVID-19. So whether it's JobKeeper, whether it's JobSeeker, whether it's the PPE purchases we made, I was one of these senior people that worked on those documents and on those policies to keep you safe. So being a local and have a senior government and decision-making experience is something that I bring to the table, And it's an important contrast between me and the Labor candidate, who's a nice person but doesn't have local experience like I do, and hasn't had that senior decision-making experience. As we've heard in recent days, this is an unusual election. It's not a question about Mark McGowan or Zach Kirkup, because we know that Mark McGowan's going to win and that Labor will be the government. The decision in Riverton is about who represents you locally. Because when there's an issue at your school, you don't call the Premier, you call your local member. And I want to be that person that picks up the phone to you and helps you, and I appreciate your support. Thank you.
Thank you to you all for your contributions so far. Now, we're at the point of the evening where we want to hear from you. If you've got questions that you would like to put to any or all of these candidates, please put your hands up now and let the people roaming the aisles know that there is something you would like to ask. Obviously, we want you to sort of lead the way and let us know what you want to hear about tonight. So I think we've got one question already. We might get started up there.
Hey, thanks. I'll stand as well. Marie Curtis, Bull Creek resident, member of Leeming Lions. So, first question is an open question to all of the candidates. One of the issues that we struggle with here in Bull Creek and Leeming, it's actually a housing issue. So, older residents, and with the greatest respect, I've got one of my good friends here, Bill, it's not easy to find places to downsize in Bull Creek and Leeming. And alternatively, it's not easy for young families to move into the area. I recently purchased the family home that I grew up in. I went to Rossi as a kid. I had to buy it from my mum. Crikey, she stung me for it, but good on her. So the issue there would be, guys, under the Murdoch Activity Structure Plan, there is a mechanism in place to allow for a rezoning of land in Bull Creek and Leeming, so allowing for a density increase, so to speak. But we're not talking about high-rise, we're talking about townhouses, downsizing options, affordable housing for young families. For everyone on the stage, you might not know that some of our primary schools, particularly in Leeming now, have to take kids from outside of the catchment area because young families can't afford to buy here. So we really have to fix that, because at a principle, a lot of people move here. You want to send your kids to Rossmoyne? You want to grow up here. It's a lovely area, but really, what's the future for the local kids who grow up here if they can't afford to buy a house here when they're done? You know, you go to school, get a good job, go to university, come back home and go, great, I can contribute to the community I grew up in. Well, hold on, no, I don't. I don't have $850,000 to buy a house. So, open question to any candidate, please feel free to answer. Will any of the candidates support the Murdoch Activity Structure Plan and rezoning in Bull Creek and Leeming to allow for downsizing and affordable houses? Thank you for the shake on the head there. It's about time we sorted it out.
Okay, look, we might just go around the room with this one. We started over there last time, so how about we start over here this time? Anthony, if you want to go first.
Thank you, Jacob, and thank you for the question. And of course, we've spoken about this on the phone several times, so thanks for coming along again to fight for something I know you're really passionate about. Look, I obviously support sensible rezoning, and one of the policies the Liberal Party is brought to this election is to give significant relief to senior residents when they downsize. So one of the things that's keeping house prices up is that some elderly residents who want to downsize aren't because of the financial penalty in doing so. So by having a policy that allows them to do that cheaper means there'll be more housing stock available to local families, and it means those residents can move into a more appropriate home. So that's a Liberal Party policy. I think, you know, all areas of Perth have to do their bit when it comes to dealing with density. I think we are doing that locally in Melville and Canning. I know some of the changes are a bit controversial, and one thing we favour is giving local people a bigger say in how their suburbs are shaped. Some of the decision-making power that Labor has taken off local people I've found to be quite scary over the last few years. And it's one of the things that I'll fight against. If I'm elected as a local MP, I'll be a voice fighting for you when Labor go too far.
Penny, over to you.
I just don't know enough about this subject, I'm sorry. I'll have to get back to you on that.
Brad?
Thank you. This is a really key issue, and I think it goes beyond just the Murdoch Activity Centre to housing more generally, and I think what you're getting at the heart of here is something that's really, really important, which is around how do we actually make our suburbs so people can age in place. We've got the diversity of housing we need for young people to move in, but also for people to grow older than them. Australia, in fact WA, is currently building the biggest houses in the world, over 230 square metres, with some of the least people in them. And we start to wonder why we have an affordability crisis in this state. We need to fix that, and we need to actually enable, through good planning, and I put the Murdoch Activity Centre in part of that, so we actually kind of build the diverse kind of housing types and housing things we need for people at different points in their lives. And we're not doing that at the moment across this state, because unfortunately we've got the wrong kind of incentives. That just leads to bigger houses with less people in them. I've spoken about some of the wrong stamp duty incentives. We actually need a real rethinking of this, because there is actually, we have an emerging housing crisis coming at us very quickly at the end of towards the end of this month, when some of the rent exemptions stop, and actually JobKeeper and the like. So housing is key, and what you're talking about absolutely needs to happen. I'll just say more broadly than just the area you're talking about as well.
Thank you. I will remind candidates as well, try to keep these answers to about a minute, if that's okay. Terry, if there's anything you'd like to contribute?
That's a good question, and I think the other two candidates have answered that for me. But my experience is that if you need to apply to whatever subdivision, you can try the council town planning, and they can decide on as per case basis. So have you ever considered, like with the housing prices and all that, and in Fremantle they had a very new innovative building that is it 60 square meters? I mean, it's a bit small, but that could be one of the solutions. We can't stop house prices from going up. In fact, it's gone up even more before I finish this answer. So the timing is all out. So I appreciate your concern. And
I'll answer your question there just before we continue on quickly. I'm not personally a big fan of subdividing, because I don't like my home getting chopped up and turned into a concrete nightmare. There's a lot of people that lived in this area for a very long time, and subdivision isn't the answer.
what about a granny flat?
No, we can't really do that under the current R20 zonings either. And getting back to the core of the issue, which is living locally, I grew up here as a kid. I went to school here. I worked for FIFO, and I had to bust my hump to buy the house I grew up in. But there was no way I was going to let it go. And it's the same thing with density, for example. I don't want to move out, but personally I'm happy to share the land, and I don't mind if people live below me. So that's what I'm talking about. Subdivision is an epic no, because that's trashing the place. I've got my canopy being chopped down. There's no community benefit to subdivision. I'm not getting underground power. I'm not getting any new facilities in my area. I've had zero spending in Bull Creek and Leeming now for so long that it's driving me bats. So no, I'm not dissing you personally, but no, subdivision is not what we need. We need townhouses. That's what we need. And we need medium density, so we're talking a limit of somewhere around 7 stories. And sorry, just quickly, right? Why I'm asking a direct question, will you support the rezoning of Bull Creek and Leeming under the Murdoch Activity Structure Plan so we can fix these issues? Yes or no? It was published in 2014 by the then Liberal Party state government. It was worked on by Melville Council. It's a published plan, it's there. Will the candidates support that plan?
Okay, we'll let the candidates answer that now. Terry, is there anything else you would like to say?
No, I'm sorry, I'm not up to date with that.
Jagadish, over to you.
Thanks for asking that question, Murray. My view on this is there is space for affordable, high-density housing with accessibility to very important health services just across the road. I will definitely support this venture provided it goes hand in glove with community engagement and consultation.
Okay, over to you, Chris.
I'd just like to say exactly what Dr. Jags just said there. Well done.
Okay, Dina, over to you.
Thanks for your question. In my work, where I work, the most thing I deal with is people that are homeless and families that are on ministry housing waiting for 7 years just to get a house. So your question, if I was elected, I'd sit with you and talk about it and then find the best strategy to move forward and how we could do that. But also looking after those that are really struggling and need to be able to get some accommodation in this lovely area of Riverton.
Thank you very much. Now, if I could just ask if we could please keep the questions as concise as possible, just to allow as many people as possible to be heard from. Got one more over here, if we go over there next.
Thanks. My question's primarily directed at Dr. Jags, but I'd like to hear from everyone. As a past president of the Hindu temple, would you support or oppose any measure in Parliament that diminishes religious freedom and the right of parents to bring up their children in terms of their beliefs? Thank you.
Well, Dr. Jags, given the question was directed at you, how about we start with you first?
First of all, can I go clear on the record that I am a religious person. I belong to the Hindu community. It is important that I engage with every person in this community, whatever background, whatever culture they belong to. The question you have asked is, would I support or not? When the time comes, I will go through every point of that particular legislation and make a call at that point.
If I could perhaps just get any indications from any other candidates, if there's any who'd like to address that question. Anthony, if you want to go first.
Look, thank you for the question, and I'm also a religious person. I'm a Christian. I think that's well known. I want to be clear that I think what the Labor government in Victoria has done when they've had control of their parliament, I think has been very extreme, and I think this goes to why it's so important at this election not to give Labor at a state level in WA total control. They've spent this whole campaign playing small target. They haven't unleashed a big policy agenda for the state. All they've talked about, even today, was about COVID-19, because they know it's a winner for them. And what that means is when you vote, you don't really know what Labor wants to do if they win, as we expect, another 4 years of government. So if you're worried about Labor going too far and extreme policies being put in place, it's why it's so important to vote for me locally, so I can be someone that stands up for you and will hold Labor to account in a constructive way when they go too far.
Chris, I think I saw an indication from you as well.
Yes. As a Liberal Democrat, our party stands against anything which restricts your freedom to do something with yourself or your family. So we would absolutely, unequivocally oppose any such policy.
I think we've got another question over here.
I've got a question for Chris Holman. Is it true that your preferences are going to the Labour Party? And if so, why is that the case? Because your platform seems to be diametrically opposed to the Labour policies.
Well, my preferences when I vote probably won't be going to the Labor Party. But yeah, it's true. Our How to Vote card lays out a, let's say, a preference order, which has led to some questions like that. And basically, it seems like a cop-out, but the truth is that I wasn't involved in the preference distributions. I don't know why they were done that way. Looking at it, to me, it doesn't make sense. I have asked the question, it's gone up the chain, but I'm just a mushroom in those sort of decisions.
So you are confirming that your preferences are going to Labour?
No, I'm not.
Not your personal ones, your party's preferences.
Oh, yeah. Well, they're
Everybody
not
who votes for you, their preferences are going to Labour.
If you follow our How to Vote card in Riverton,
Thank you.
Yes, it will go to Labor. And no, I don't know why.
So a couple more. There's one in the green shirt in the middle there.
Sorry. My question, I actually have two questions. They're both for Dr. Krishnan. The first one is relating to, as you're aware, a lot of people move into this particular electorate because of the schools. And the previous Liberal government had committed funds for the stage 2 upgrade for Willerton Senior High School, which were promptly withdrawn when this particular Labour government came into power. There are election commitments now being made for the community to reinstate some of those grants for the school. The heart of the question is, what additional sums or what additional commitments are you making to the community which had not been made previously by the Liberal government? That is the first thing. The second thing is, how do we know these are going to be honored again? And it was almost like a punitive action which Labour did as far as the community is concerned in withdrawing those funds. So tomorrow, if you don't get a Labour candidate, are those commitments not going to be met by the party? Because this is extremely distressing as far as the community is concerned. So that was the first question. The second one I'll ask once I've got an answer to that.
If I may make a small correction to what you said, it's the stage 3 in Willerton Senior High, which was $12.5 million. And in addition to that, we have made a commitment of $35 million for the Rosepoint Senior High School stage 1 development. Apart from that, we have a list of commitments that we have made for primary schools in the electorate. I can read out, but you could see in the handouts and the letterbox drop that we have done that various primary schools are receiving funding as well. To your question as to why the funding was pulled out, it was basically because of very bad financial management by the previous Colin Barnett government, which left the government no choice but to make cuts to various issues.
So, I might just open that question up to any other candidates who want to comment on Anthony.
Yeah. So what the Labor candidate has just admitted, that decision to cut stage 3 funding was in response to the previous government. It was vindictive. And it's, I got to say, as someone who lives in this community, I was so disappointed. In 2017, the first Labor budget, they cut stage 3 for Willerton Senior High School. It was a broken promise from the Labor government. Now, of course, election rolls around and Labor says, oh, guess what, everyone, we're going to fund it. And they're trying to tell you should vote for them because of that. Well, they said that last time, and then they cut the funding. And I note the Labor candidate didn't answer the question. He was asked by the questioner, what happens if you don't win? Will Labor still honour your commitments? He didn't answer. And I suspect what will happen is they've promised something like $65 million to this seat, this election. And if they don't get their way, this is what Labor's like, they'll drop this community quicker, just like they did in 2017. And this is why you need a local Liberal. The reason why that funding is now in the budget is because you had a strong local Liberal, Mike Nahan, who did not let the government forget that in 2017 they let Willerton Senior High School down. And I'll also add that it was only after my campaign made the commitment to Willerton Senior High School that Labor then Me Too'd us and copied the commitment. But you can't trust them.
Just don't want to get too back and forth, but Jagadish, if you just want to give a brief response.
I'd like to emphasize that Mark McGowan had our back during the most difficult times throughout the world. He stood in Rosepoint Senior High School and made the commitment. He will stand with it. A re-elected Labour government will make this commitment come through, whereas the Liberal leader has already conceded, saying he's not going to win. How is my opponent, Liberal candidate, going to fulfill any of his commitments when his leader has conceded that he's not going to be making it?
Okay, we might. Are there any other candidates who want to contribute to this discussion at all before we move on? You mentioned you had a second question. If you could just briefly give us that second question.
Quick, this thing, I just wanted to ask you, with respect to the preferences, I am given to understand that the preferences, you've preferenced the anti-vaccination party above the Liberal parties also, is that correct? And, as a qualified GP who's got a clinic, who's going to be administering the COVID vaccines, it just doesn't seem right in terms of, your personal values and the way things pan out. Can you, confirm if this is correct or not?
Thank you for asking that question and giving me the opportunity to clarify that. First of all, as a candidate, like Chris said, we do not have any say in how the preference order works. And secondly, I have been a GP for 25 years. I have been on the front line during COVID. I now manage and lead the team of 259 GPs who are going to be providing COVID vaccination here in Perth. I designed the training program for them, and I'm going to be one of the first GPs to be receiving the vaccine. So the preferential order was just a sequential thing. If you look at the how to vote card, after people have marked one against Labour, it does not really matter how the preferences go.
Just very briefly, are there any other candidates who'd like to address that point? Anthony?
Thank you. Well, two initial points. If it doesn't matter where the preferences go after 1 or 2, then it wouldn't have been a problem to preference a Liberal Party ahead of the anti-vaccination, no mandatory vaccination party, like we did. We preferenced Jagadish Krishnan ahead of that party because we know we're in a pandemic and we don't want to give credibility to groups that cause doubt about vaccinations right now. Now, there's a really important difference, thank you, between me and the Labor candidate. He told you just then that he didn't choose his preferences. Well, let me tell you what, I chose mine. And that's a really important difference. Because what you need as a local representative is someone that will stand up to their party and or their government or their opposition when they get things wrong. He just told you, there's no one in this room who knows more than the Labor candidate how important vaccines are. He's a GP, he's qualified to give the COVID-19 vaccination. Yet when the Labor Party gave him a preference that was against his values, he didn't speak up. He didn't stop it. And that tells you what he'll be like on so many local issues in the community. That's why it's so important to vote for someone who can stand up to their party and can choose their own preferences like I did.
Before we move on, would any other candidates like to address any of the points made? Might move on then. I think we had a question over there.
Every other member on the panel spoke about their connection with the electorate. Can you talk to us about your connection to Riverton? What memories do you have here? What connections do you have here? And I know you will say you work or you own a GP practice. How long have you owned that and worked there for?
If throughout Australia, if I know people in one particular electorate, that is Riverton. Wherever I've been providing service from, I have been serving the people of Riverton. One of the audience earlier mentioned I was the president of the Perth Hindu Temple. Many people from Riverton use the Perth Hindu Temple, and I've served on that community for 10 years and finishing it off as a president. I've played for the local Linwood Soccer Club. I've connected with every other Indian community, supporting them over the past so many years. I've been part and parcel of the community. I have knocked 14,000 plus doors to speak to the people of Riverton. I may not have a physical address in Riverton, but I do live in the hearts of the people in Riverton.
I think we've got one up here and then we might come down here. Oh, sure. Just go up there first. We just keep the question brief to make sure as many people as possible can get a chance, please.
Sure. So my question is to all of the candidates. Well, given that in Riverton now we have 3 train stations with Bull Creek, Murdoch and now Ramford Road, whoever our elected member is, so potentially any of you really, feel free any of you to pipe up. Separate from partisan politics, I think it's really important that we make sure that the infrastructure for our community is just built to a high standard. You know, like one of the issues we face in Bull Creek and Leeming is that to catch the train, we have to cross 6 lanes of traffic, which really is a little ridiculous, to be honest, right? So we got to fix that. So separate from partisan politics, and we've heard lots about who's going to win, do we vote local, put all of that aside. If Mark McGowan and his current government wins and Rita Saffioti remains as the Minister for Infrastructure, will each one of the candidates confirm yes or no that they will work with her in a bipartisan fashion to ensure improved access and upgrades to all of our train stations? Because regardless of race, religion, colour, creed, sex, gender or whatever, we all just have to catch a train sometimes, right?
I might get the candidates to jump in and respond to that now. Just get a show show of hands from anyone who's keen to comment. Brad, start with you.
Very happy to say yes to that, and really great question. Really important. And just to give you an example of that, one of my previous roles was on the board of West Cycle, which is the peak body for cycling in Western Australia. And one of the things we did and worked very closely with the government on was actually making sure that the design of all the new Metronet stations actually has pedestrian and cycling connectivity. That's really good, because we've got to design it that way, because it's that last 15 minutes, those connections that really matter, and that's a really great question, so thank you.
Any other candidates keen to address that? Just go over there, Chris.
That was a yes/no question. Yes.
Anthony?
Yes. Yes, when the microphone works, yes.
Penny?
Yeah, definitely about improving infrastructure for the people of Riverton. That is a yes.
Penny?
Absolutely.
Dina?
Yes, yes. I'd love to have that discussion with you, yeah.
Terry, do you want to contribute to something?
Yes from me, but not very sure about Rita. So.
Just to sum it up in front of everyone in the room, right? We've now got a commitment from all of our candidates here tonight that we're going to do something about the housing issues in Riverton, and particularly Bull Creek and Leeming on the Murdoch Activity Structure Plan, and they've all committed to fixing our train stations. So, yeah, it's separate, like you damn said it, right? Doesn't matter who we vote for tonight, we're actually going to get two massive things fixed because they've all committed to it. So that's a win straight away.
Okay, we might move on to the next question there. We had a couple more questions down the front. I think just a question up there.
Hi, how are you going, everyone? I'd like to keep things interesting and ask a question that might be a little controversial. What are your views on the legalization of the recreational use of marijuana, and do you view it as a crime or immoral for those of you who are religious?
Let's perhaps go around the room for this one. Dina, is there anything you'd like to say?
I'll have to think about that.
Might come back to you, Chris.
The Liberal Democrats are in favour of decriminalising, legalising marijuana, as am I.
Dr. Krishna?
We know that there's medicinal cannabis clinics which is already operating in Australia, and it is run by professionals who make a clinical judgment on who can be given and on what circumstances they can be given. If it has to be completely deregulated, there are pros and cons which will be discussed at that point in time. But as a medical professional, as far as there are checks and balances, as far as there is expert advice and professional advice for people to be using it in a safe manner for a particular purpose, I don't have any problems with it.
Terry?
Like you say, it's too controversial, but we need to do more research, from the Canadian and American experience. I'm not sure how it's leading, but it's all conflicting reports that I'm reading. So I think we need to put it back to the electorate, the voters in Riverton or in the state, to check maybe a referendum to see whether that is a doable legislation.
The Greens support the decriminalisation of marijuana, and I think there is a growing medical case, especially around how it can be used for pain relief and those kinds of things. Really happy to support it.
We don't have any policies like the party itself, but personally, I 100% support the concept of bodily autonomy, and I think it's absolutely 100% our responsibility what we put into our bodies. So I completely support the idea of it being decriminalised, not legalised. Thank you.
Thank you. I guess I'm the odd one out then. I support the medical use of marijuana, and I don't support the decriminalisation for recreational use. I will say I'm open-minded about changing that position if I'm presented with expert evidence that shows it's safe, but until I see that, I don't support the decriminalisation for recreational use.
Okay, I think we had a question, or maybe even two down the front.
Yes, I just wanted to hear a little bit more from the minor parties about what they can contribute to Parliament if they're elected in.
We might go around the room for this one with the minor parties. Penny, how about we start with you?
haven't really gotten that far. This was kind of like, came out of the blue, and I'd probably be a bit of a troublemaker actually. So, yeah, that's your answer at the moment. I'll have to think about it a lot, but I don't expect that to happen at this point. You never know. Miracles do happen.
Brad, it's probably that age-old question, are the Greens a minor party or not? But Muggy, to chime in on this.
Yeah, thank you. It was I think the minor parties play a really important role. And look, and to be blunt about it, minor parties are only ever going to get elected to the upper house, not the lower house. I think there's a really important role they play there in reviewing legislation, working with government, making it better, engaging with their communities. And I think it's actually a really essential role. And as I said at the start, I actually think it's an exciting role we can play, and I think a really important role, again, knowing what the outcome of the lower house will be in terms of the McGowan government winning, the role of the minor parties, and I'd also say the Liberal Party in this case, around actually keeping the McGowan government to account, but also making them better and kind of taking them further, I think is a really important role.
Good question. I think with the minor parties getting some traction in the lower house, there are many things that I was going to say in my earlier speech. If you look at the whole system, it's actually broken down. That's why people have stopped listening. So we can actually make a difference, keeping I would quote from one of the other politicians, keep the bastards honest. So if you look at the whole, sorry to pick on some parties, I'll let that be nameless, self-serving, power broking. You can hear, and that's why they got decimated in the last election, and it goes on, and they've stopped listening, and it's become self-serving. So our job is to make sure that people are actually there to look after the people. I think we forgot, I think one of you was saying, you got to be accountable and make sure that you know why you're there. And the other thing is the fake advertising, sorry, the party will remain nameless. It's the same thing. We keep the place safe and strong, and it was so accidental that we are so isolated. And strong is because we were selling tons of iron ore to China. So it's like somehow or rather they have actually stopped listening and keep beating their own chest. That's my observation.
Come back to the major parties at the end, but I might jump across to you now, Chris.
Yeah, thanks for that question. I kind of touched on that in my intro, where I said a key role for any minor party is to keep the major parties honest. We're about transparency, accountability, things like introducing mandatory sunset clauses into any legislation that's getting pushed through, and there's been a lot of stuff pushed through under the COVID emergency that we've been going through. The Liberal Democrats have had a candidate, or had a very successful candidate, had a member in the upper house for the past 4 years. Aaron Stonehouse was elected. If you want to check to see what he's done, look at his voting record, look at the work he's put in. So if you do vote Liberal Democrats, you can vote for me in Riverton. My chances are admittedly slim, but Aaron's chances of getting re-elected to the upper house are good. And he has been a valuable, tireless contributor to Parliament, and that's what we're there for.
Dena?
Yep. I look at the lower house as looking at working on the grassroots with people and mainly hearing the voices of the communities. And that's what I'd want to be, is the advocate, so that the voices are heard from the communities. And I really advocate hard. I don't give up. I make sure that you're heard, because I think a lot of times you have been let down, and you've heard a lot of it tonight here. So I'd just like to say, if I'm selected, or I'd really like to work hard with the community, hear the voices, and to make a change, for the better for the community.
Might just get the two major party candidates to weigh in now. Jagadish, if there's anything you'd like to say.
It's very clear. It's not me saying, the opposition leader saying that Mark McGowan's going to be Premier. He deserves to be Premier again for the next term because he stood up to Canberra, got the GST share. He stood against Clive Palmer when he wanted to open the borders, kept us safe and strong. There's been numerous amount of achievements which has happened in the last term, and we look forward to working and delivering more in the next coming 4 years.
And Anthony?
Well, the question was about the role Mane parties can play, which I know the Labor candidate didn't even mention in that answer. That was just him reading talking points that were given to him by Labor headquarters, which shows how bloody useless you are, honestly. Let me answer the question. My most recent job, as I mentioned, was working for the Australian government, and I worked for the leader of the Australian Senate, who had to deal with minor parties to get legislation passed. And while I didn't personally deal with the minor parties, we had other staff engaged in that, I often helped prepare some of the financial aspects of some of the bits and pieces we worked on. And I can say, and don't tell Sam Calabrese, the Liberal Party State Director, I said this, but I think minor parties do provide some benefits to our democracy, not in the lower house. That's where you're going to create chaos if you vote for a minor party. But in the upper house, as I think Brad mentioned, they can play a role. And it's often quite frustrating for the Liberal Party and the Labor Party in government when minor parties block bits of legislation that we really want to pass. But my experience in Canberra is whenever the Scott Morrison's government failed to get legislation through, it tended to be stuff that ultimately was out of step with community viewpoints anyway. And, so having that strong bicameral system, a strong upper house that blocks legislation, I think, is a really, really important element of Australian democracy, and it's minor parties that help make that work. And I know that at a state level, where Labor hasn't had total control of the upper house over the last 4 years, minor parties, including Aaron Stonehouse from the Liberal Democrats, has helped to block radical policies like Labor's gold tax they tried to introduce twice, and other, the nationalisation of the rock lobster industry, which they also tried to introduce. So, don't tell the Liberal Party I said this, but I think minor parties in the upper house are an asset and an asset to democracy. Cool.
I saw another question, I think in the middle, in the second row here. I think there was a question. Actually, one up from the third row, and then we'll come down to the second row after that. Sorry.
We're on. Oh, good evening. My name's Robert Sewan. I recognise the Indigenous and share the concept to voice. And I've been a resident here in Rossmoyne, Central Road, now for 50 years. I've been a Justice of the Peace for 53 years. My concern for the future relative to what we have in Riverton as an electorate is the circumstance that since I've been here in this 50 years, the intensity and the zoning has gone in my little piece of space from R10 to R17.5 to now to R30. And if you know the relativity of that, and the circumstance in my question to the panel is, do you understand and acknowledge that we are stuck here in the city of Canning with 30,000 more dwellings by 2032 and 320,000 more dwellings in the region? And where's the additional reserve in open space? My concern for Riverton is the circumstance that back in the 1950s, the river was dredged, and out of that dredging, to improve the foreshore of what we have now in Shelley Beach, there were 2 reserves established, both invested in the city, in their care and attention. One of them was foregone, and 80 dwellings were built in the time frame. Since then, we've seen the river run until about 1970, 22 years. And in that time, the river washed back 1/4 of the reserves of Shelley Beach. And I'm putting to the panel the circumstance that is where we should be working in looking at underwriting for Riverton and the whole of the metropolitan region the public open space reserve. So I'd like the panel to acknowledge that you know that we are faced with 30,000 more dwellings by 2032, and where are you going to give us the public open space reserve to support our lifestyle?
I'll put that to the panel now. Can I just get an acknowledgement from the panel who would like to speak on this topic? Brad, you first.
Another really excellent question, and I think you've nailed it. We are going down a very suboptimal, would be my polite word, planning route here, where R30 is the dumbest of densities in some ways, because it doesn't give us the density we need to get public transport or any of those things, but all it does is rid our suburbs of trees, rid our suburbs of amenity, and doesn't actually create the kind of open space we need. Bigger densities, so bigger developments are required to put in a 10% public open space requirement, but those smaller subdivisions aren't. But even that is broken because, as the gentleman indicated, that's not adequate. If we're going to have more people, then coming with that, which I think is actually the right thing in the right location, but with that you need more public open space, and I think the examples you gave are really good. We've got to get smart, whether it's really high amenity along the river, but also in other locations through pocket parks and those kinds of things. And we also need in parallel, much greater investment in public transport in those regions. We can't simply add in more people and expect our existing road network to work. And as Lewis Mumford said, you don't deal with congestion by widening roads. It's like dealing with obesity by undoing your belt. So those two things I think are absolutely required as we go forward, and I absolutely support what you're saying.
Anthony, I think you indicated you wanted to talk as well.
Great. Well, I think Brad gave an excellent answer, actually. I agree with what you said. And thank you for asking the question. So I guess the short answer is I agree with you. I think we really do need to go back to the drawing board in a local area about how we're going to do density. We know we're going to do it, but we already don't have enough tree canopy in this district. There's not enough public open space. And I'm not sure the City of Canning and Melville really have the appropriate plans to deal with that. And I know when I speak to local people, what a big issue that is. I hear it all the time. So if I have the privilege of being elected as the member for Riverton to take over from Mike Nahan, I'll certainly be very much engaged in that issue, and that'll start with very thorough community consultation, so I'm really clear on where the problem areas are and what the key bits of contention are, and I'll then bring that to the City of Canning and fight to make sure that the views of people in the area are addressed. But I agree, R30, as you said, so it doesn't make much sense. We know we need density, but we need to do it better than what's been done at the moment.
Just see if any other candidates wish to contribute.
I have engaged with the Canning River volunteers group and also made a commitment to them to support them. And I've had the opportunity to go through the whole of the Canning River and the conservative areas. I am passionate towards it because my background is that I come from a tea growing hilly region in India. I grew up amongst tea bushes, climbing orange trees and plucking it fresh and eating. I have a passion towards nature, open spaces. I acknowledge your concerns. I am willing to work as hard as I can in conjunction with the community's consultation to get the best outcome for Riverton.
Penny, you indicated you wanted to talk as well.
Yeah, I don't have the legalese or the political language, and I certainly don't know anything really about Riverton. I've only spent a small amount of time here, but I can speak for myself that basically it's the most unfortunate situation to be in when you live in high density situation and there's absolutely no green space around you whatsoever. It's actually leads to deep levels of depression, and I'm completely with you on that. I would like everybody to have that opportunity, because to have contact with nature is probably the most life-affirming thing that any of us actually experiences or knows. Thanks for the question.
Any other candidates wish to say anything on this topic?
Yeah, that's thank you for that question, and you've been here for a long, long time, so you're very knowledgeable about it. You would have seen things really change. So, you know, what I'd love to do is just sit with the community and talk about it and have a look at what's really happening and how we can make the changes. And like I say, you know, the community is the power. The people power coming together can make a change. That's how politics starts, that's how it changes. So the people have to take the power back. And I think in Riverton, that's what you need to do. With all these questions you've talked about today, it's time to come together and make them accountable, make me accountable if I'm elected. But I think it's time to do that. Yeah.
Sorry, we'll just stick with the panel for a moment if that's okay. Chris, you were keen to say?
I will be quick. I agree about R30 being no man's land. We need proper planning, proper infrastructure, including green areas, proper public transport.
Terry, you can.
Left me with no time. But I was just observing that other suburbs have done it quite well. If you look at, I don't approve of it, but in Canning Bridge, 5 big towers, thousands of people have moved in, and they still manage to sort of get the traffic moving. So with the extra density, I think with the pressure all around us, with the infill, we will have to, may have to put up with it. But learning from the other suburbs may be a good start.
Okay, we'll start down the front here, then we'll go over there, and I see a couple more hands up over here as well. But down the front.
Thank you. My name is Alan, and I also have lived here since 1970 in Riverton in Wavell Avenue, and the subdivision that's happening is creating a desert. All the trees are disappearing in Riverton, Wavell Avenue, and it's linked to climate change. It's getting hotter. My house is hotter because all the trees around me have gone. And I would support the last speaker and the action that we should take there. I would like to revert back to the question before about the Liberal Party being rather anxious about the control, particularly of the upper house, and the reference about dysfunctionality. The upper house, in my time, in my memory, since 1950 in my memory, has never been controlled by the Labor Party because the upper house is gerrymandered. The gerrymander means that the rural vote is twice the value. Now that's the way that rural people vote is conservative, and that's their right, but they have twice the value. And Anthony's talking about a rather pious position about can give his preferences, he's quite free. The Liberal Party has, for the life of me, been controlled by the National Party because they fall into line with the legislation. So all through this period, the upper house does not operate as a sort of representative house for various minor parties. It's so controlled because it's gerrymandered. The Labor Party's had various landslides. We've never controlled the upper house, and all that time the Liberals have controlled the upper house. So the question is, will you reform the upper house so that the minor parties, like the Senate, which does have one vote, one value, and it is more representative of the Australian broad view of the world. The current state parliament has a gerrymandered upper house that does not represent the broad view of the citizens of all of Western Australia. Thank you. Will you reform the upper house?
Anthony, seems like that one was directed at you.
Thank you for this question. I wish I had an hour to answer this. This is one of my favourite topics. As a student of political science, I love talking about democracy and the different forms that it takes and how that impacts on people. I just want to reframe what you said, because some of what you said wasn't quite right, but I understand your point. So the Senate for Australia is somewhat gerrymandered. So for example, the state of Tasmania is overrepresented, and we have a certain number of senators per jurisdiction. So you don't have proportional representation to population across each state. So that's the same as what we have at a state level in Western Australia, although I acknowledge the disparity is much different, say, for example, the mining and pastoral region, versus city versus, Tasmania, a Tasmanian senator and the rest of the country. Yeah. So my personal answer is I'm open-minded about reform. but I'm also not completely against having some advantage given to rural people, because the upper house can only block. It doesn't run government. It can't, do all the things that governments do. It can only block. And there is some, and I could speak to you an hour, for an hour about historical examples, but there is some value in making sure that democratic power is somewhat geographically spread. If you had exactly proportional representation in the upper house, it means if you live in the Kimberley, you are irrelevant. If you live somewhere in some small town in rural WA, you are irrelevant because all the population's in Perth, which means all the political power is in Perth. At least with the upper house, the way it's structured, it means rural people at least have representatives that can block legislation. And of course, the upper house is fairly diverse. There are a number of minor parties there.
It does seem like we've got a lot of questions, so we might move on. We've got another one up here.
Thank you. I'd like to start this question by laying down the fact that I am a bisexual man, that I've already faced the tough journey of coming to terms with myself and faced an incredible amount of homophobia in my still short life, so this topic is incredibly personal to me. At the beginning of audience participation, a question was presented discussing the role of religion in the lives of individuals and children's bodily autonomy, and therefore the presence of religion in, by extension, their sexuality. Mr. Spagnolo, in response to the question before, mentioned the extreme measures by the Victorian Labour government in relation to this topic. The most recent development by said government in this area was the banning of gay conversion therapy. Given the many negatives of this topic, including the fact that said therapy makes a person who's gone through it 2 times more likely to be suicidal, can the Liberal candidate truly sit here and support this horrific practice?
Anthony, question for you.
Thank you. Thank you, and thank you for asking that question. I know having to stand up and ask questions like that must be really tough, and you probably feel like it's unfair you even have to ask it in the first place. So I appreciate you coming along and asking the question. So I think you're asking me whether or not I support gay conversion therapy. Okay, I don't really know much about what that is, so my answer is I don't think I support it. I'm pretty sure that I don't. You've got to remember, one thing about me is I'm a Liberal, but I'm also young. I'm 32, so I'm a millennial. And so my views and opinions on these sorts of topics tend to reflect that of my generation. So I'm pretty relaxed about people being different. I don't expect everyone to fit into one box. And so I'm totally relaxed about you being the way you are, and I support that. And I certainly don't want to do anything that harms you or makes you feel like you're not equal to the rest of us.
Very briefly, if that's okay.
Yeah, could I just ask in response then, to which topics were you referring by the Victorian Labour government as extreme in relation to this matter?
I'm referring to some of the things they want to teach in schools. I really support parents having choice, and I think there's a balance in these things, and I think sometimes some of the bureaucrats and the Victorian government go too far, and I think sometimes these things are hopelessly politicised. My approach will always be to listen, to be approachable about these things, and to be pragmatic. I'm not dogmatic about any of these topics, and I certainly don't want to do anything that harms people like you. And I can never really relate to what you're going through, because I'm obviously haven't gone through that. But I'm sure it's tough, and I don't want to be here to be threatening to you or do anything that harms you. I want to be on your side, and I'll always be there to listen, and I'll be pragmatic on these things, not dogmatic.
Okay, we might move up. I've got a question up the back, on the right here.
I don't think you can have an election for the area of Riverton without the candidates having their say on Roe Highway. We need to hear what you've got to say about Roe Highway.
It's probably a very good point. Look, let's start with Anthony here. Obviously, it's a cause the Liberals have campaigned a lot about. Anthony, what's your message on that?
We support Roe 8 and 9, and we know that local people support Roe 8 and 9. You always hear this line from Labor, oh, you brought it to the last election, you lost. But we lost the last election for other issues, not Roe 8 and 9. I know when I'm knocking on doors, when I'm talking to people, they tell me they want this built because they want to be safe when they drive on Leach Highway. They want to be safe when they're driving their kids to school. They want to be safe when they're driving home from work. So I know that this is a really important issue all across this district, and I support it. And I won't be forced to follow the party line. I don't want to have another dig at the Labor candidate, but I'll just say I'm aware that when he's been asked this, he's said he's sympathised with people, but basically his answer has been, well, I have to follow Labor's policy on this, which is to delete Roe 8 and 9 forever. So if there's a very clear difference between the two major parties on this. So if you're pro-Row 8, then, and that's something you want to vote for, then you need to vote for me in Riverton so we can stop them from deleting it forever. Thank you.
How about we go about the room, go around the room, I should say, on this one. Penny, is anything you'd like to contribute? Yes. You can pass if you prefer.
Yeah, I absolutely. I didn't support the Row 8 when it was going through Fibrillate at all. I actually haven't really paid much attention to what's been going on since then.
Brad?
The Greens' position is very clear. We don't support Row 8 and 9, and certainly would rather see the very large funds required for that invested in public transport in the area.
Terry?
That's what I was saying all the time with the major parties, wasting all the taxpayers' money, cancelling it, and same thing in Victoria, and it costs $1 billion to wipe out the plan just to spite at the opponent. So back to a simple solution. I'm just working through, I spoke to some engineer. Instead of arguing with both parties, why don't we think outside the box and build a tunnel underneath, which we have done with Gram Farmers, and surprisingly is doable. So think outside the box and solve all the problems with the bickering and on-stop wasting taxpayers' money. There's the expert at doing that.
Jagadish?
Thank you for giving me this opportunity to talk about Row 8. Row 8 and 9 is a road to nowhere. It does not reach the Fremantle port. We have a port in Fremantle with limited capacity of certain size of ships which we could accommodate. We do not want to leave the next generation with such limitations to be able to export, import, and do world trade. There is a permanent solution to this, not a band-aid solution like the Row 8, Row 9, where we are pushing our problems to another suburb. That is not a West Australian way of doing it, where you want peace, but you don't bother about somebody else carrying the burden, eventually ending up in East Fremantle being a car park. The Westport is the permanent solution to this, where there's going to be a dedicated freight line on the Tonkin Highway, Thomas Road, Ankertel Road, going all the way to Westport. Thank you.
Liberal Democrats support Row 8 and 9.
Who supports it in the audience? I'll support it too then.
Okay, thank you everyone for that. I think we've got a question in the middle of the room here.
Thank you very much. I'm a Rossmoyne resident. Dr. Jaggs and I had a conversation when he was outdoor knocking a little while ago. My question is for Dr. Jaggs. If you were elected, what happens with all your work in the COVID teams and the vaccinations? Does that mean we have a part-time Member of Parliament while all that is dealt with, and COVID is so unpredictable we don't know how long and how many types of vaccines and immunisations and everything else will go on? Or do you walk away from all that training and all that work you've done with all those COVID people and leave them to it in order to be a Member of Parliament? What is going to happen, please, so that we know we have a full-time member? Thank you.
One of the first things I did, even before putting my expression of interest to be representing the Labour Party, is resigning of being a director of my medical practices. There is a senior management team taken over by a new management director, the chief medical officer, a deputy chief medical officer, general manager operations. The team looks after the management side of things. When COVID hit, there was a big fear amongst GPs to jump in the front line because they were putting their lives at risks. That was the time when I had to show my leadership to say that I am here to show you how to be brave and a frontline worker. When a situation like that comes, that takes priority. But otherwise, I do have patients who followed me from Byford. I will continue to see them a few hours in the weekend, not letting them down. And a full-time parliamentarian, I will do my best to serve the people of Riverton being available. I've also made a commitment to move to the electorate when I cross the line as soon as possible.
Might just get an indication from the audience on any more questions who might have one. I think we've got one down here.
Thank you. I'm Katy Mayer, and I've been on and off the Melville Council for 20 years. And one thing that really concerns me is something that this gentleman raised a few minutes ago about housing densities. I didn't want to talk about housing densities, but I do want to talk about public open space and natural bushlands and forests and all our beautiful Western Australia, which is going to be destroyed by development. Now, why I raise this is because I asked the council on a number of occasions and have been trying to get support for putting a value on bushland, reserves, parks, and at the moment I can't seem to get any traction on it. We've got a carbon price on emissions, but we can't seem to get a price on open space and bushland and our forests. We haven't got any value on it. Now the problem with that is, whenever I hear about land, it's always how much it is to put housing on and how much we're going to get for it in those terms. But we don't have any way of saying that's a reserve. It is worth umpteen million. We only... Yeah, I'm just giving the background. We're told it's worth umpteen million, but that's development dollars. It's not the worth to mental health. I'm told, oh yeah, we all know it's important. But the next day we've got it rezoned as a development site. So what I want is to ask a question from you. How will you address this situation of putting value on open space so it is not considered a development site? So the open space has value, because what people forget is if you build your house on a river or if you build your house abutting a park, it is more valuable than a house that has just other houses around it. But nobody recognises the value of the open space for its own sake. So what can you do about it as a Member of Parliament, since we seem to have a government extremely pro-development at the moment?
Might just get indications from the panel on who's keen to talk on this one. Anthony?
Katy, thank you for the question. I'll give a brief answer, but if you want to grab a beer sometime and talk about this, very happy to. There's an economist by the name of Milton Friedman who talked about putting prices on public open space and things like that and how that would rationalise its use, which is a really interesting theory, but that's not for tonight. Look, my view is I don't support putting a price on public open space. I don't think that's the right way to do it, although it's an interesting theory. I think what we need is just a stronger principled approach to these things from the state government level. They need to go back to basics and say, what do we need to be delivering what's in the interests of the local community, and go from there. And obviously I'm in favour of more public open space, especially in our local area where it's really, really badly underdone. And a lot of the new density that we're getting, as has been mentioned tonight, is making that even worse. You're having trees cut down and backyards disappearing as we're getting more blocks split up, and it's making it even worse. And I think there's going to be consequences from that long term that we haven't quite got our heads around yet, which I'm really concerned about. So I support more public open space, but not by putting a price on it.
Brad?
Just to follow on that, I largely agree. And I think what we actually need to be doing is actually, through our planning system, which is actually the right way of doing it, is actually mandating public open space. As densities increase, that level should go up. We're still, this idea of doing 10%, while not having low densities, is not appropriate. Look at Europe now, new developments out there, 30% is a new standard minimum, and those kinds of things I think we can learn from. But I would say, in terms of pricing things, one of the things we are looking at in the City of Freo, just putting my mayor hat on for a moment, is pricing trees, because I think that's actually something that we do see being cut down in the public realm, and you can put a real price on those, and that price can be quite significant and can be a real pushback against people who think it's an easy way forward to cut it down when they do a development.
Jagadish?
Yeah, we've already discussed this issue of public open space being limited and development going on. My view is that we can't stop development, but we can have an incorporated development approval process which accommodates environmental protection as well into it. And I will be advocating for that very strongly if I'm elected.
Any other candidates? Terry?
Katie, back to your question about open space. So I thought, thinking outside the box, why can't we mandate it and it's not for sale? So I'm just starting the case with where I play golf in Glen Iris, and the whole golf course has turned into a development site. And surprisingly, with all these petitions against, the golf course becoming a development site, the residents had no chance when the developers came back again. I think the development is like, so just have to be harsh and just mandate and say, this is not for sale at all costs. But of course you have the value as well. It's not for sale. That's all.
Maybe we should look at these open spaces and see what the Aboriginal heritage site is in that area, and we claim it back for ourselves. To make sure that there's a law in place so that they can't touch it.
Chris, or either of you keen to comment? Chris or Penny?
Yeah, I'll just keep it very brief. The Liberal Democrats support policies that improve quality of life, and having a robust development consultation process to ensure that minimums like 30% are enforced is something that I believe the party would be behind.
Penny?
Hello? Yeah, once again, when it comes to the value or the lack of value that's put on our environment and areas where our fellow creatures live and breed and feed, I don't think that we're putting enough value on it at all. I understand that there's a need for infrastructure because people need homes, etc. But we do need to find some kind of balance. I mean, personally, I'm hugely in favour of trying to completely change the way we build houses so that we can actually incorporate our environment more. Because at the moment, when we see something being developed, it's basically complete carnage, basically. And also what's happening basically on a Joondalup development right now at Marina. What was it? $1? $1 an acre? Or $1 a hectare? Anyway, yes, it was basically selling the land because it's, for virtually nothing to the developers. Is that right? Yeah. And that's not acceptable as far as we're concerned either. Yeah. Thanks.
Okay, so we are getting close to the end. I think we might have time for at least one more, possibly two. We've got one in the middle over there.
Thank you. I'd like to return to the one vote, one value question, and I'm generally in favour of having a geographical base because I think that the people in the country contribute a great deal to this community, and to have them disenfranchised by the one vote, one value thing coming in. And I appreciate the one vote, one value, and I appreciate the nice thing that we like to see there, but it would worry me. And Jagadish, a question really directed to you, although I'd like to appreciate comments from the other panel, particularly the minor parties, if they're going to be influential in the upper house. Are you in favour of one vote, one value? And do you think that the Labor government is going to push this?
In the past few weeks, this question has come up several times in the press, and Premier Mark McGowan has been open and clear about it, saying it is not on the agenda at the moment.
Which means that it may well be on the agenda in the future.
Any other candidates wish to contribute on that one? Chris?
Yeah, the Liberal Democrats and myself personally have a deep distrust of anything government does, including making changes to rules or anything like that, because I've yet to see a lot of good come out of most of that. We would absolutely oppose anything that reduced the opportunities for minor parties to get into the upper house, not just because we want to wield huge cudgels of power, just because we do, the bastards on us.
candidates keen to say anything on that one? We might move on then. I think we've got a question over on there.
My question's to Dr. Jaggs. I won't ask the others because I know what their answers will be. In relation to the approvals and the developments that we have in this area, I've lived here for 35 years now in the region, and where I saw deterioration in terms of public open space and developments was the previous time Labor was in government, 2001, where there was a lot of significant development done, very high density, without provision of infrastructure. We have, again, this time, seen changes to the planning laws, where the Planning Commission can be overridden by the Minister. For example, in Kwinana, we have seen the buffer zone for the industry area being developed and the development approval being given by the Minister after the State Planning Commission has knocked it back, after the Supreme Court knocked back the development twice, and it goes to the Minister to approve and the Minister signed off on it. My question to Dr. Jaggs is, will you stand up against your party, your Premier and your Minister and say this is not on if that comes to here?
I have heard this concern during my door knock, and that's what I stand for. I'm here to represent the people of Riverton. When there are concerns for Riverton, I will stand up for the people of Riverton.
We're probably getting pretty close to the end of the night. I think we might have time for one last one if there's anyone particularly keen. We've got one over here. Make that the lucky last.
I'd like to address something that Mr. Holman said before in relation to general distrust of the power of the state. At the beginning of the panel, you brought up the increase by the Liberal Democrats as a promise if they were to make government in spending on police and our police force. Seeing as the police are the enactors of the power of the state, how does that correlate with that idea of libertarianism that you put forward?
Nice question. While I certainly have libertarian tendencies, I'm not one of the anarcho-capitalists whose utopia is my little plot of land defended with my machine gun nests and attack dogs. Unfortunately, I realise that being somewhat pragmatic, we've got to work within the limits of what we've got. So if we have to have a police force, I would like to see them deployed effectively. I don't want to see the tax dollars that I pay, we all pay hard, wasted. I don't want to see the police force frustrated by being deployed into revenue-raising activities, into minor things like, for example, prosecuting marijuana use for somebody who's got some plants in their pocket. I'd like to see more community policing done, so the police are out engaging with the community, so they're not seen as the evil, oppressive force, and it can be, more of a détente, hopefully.
Well, on that note, I think we might just about wrap this up. I'll hand back to Ben in a second, but a couple of quick notes. Firstly, if we can thank the candidates for their contribution tonight. Now, you've still got about 11 days to vote. Polling day is March 13, but of course there's early voting underway really right across the state. You can postal vote as well, so make sure you do get out and vote. Thanks to All Saints for putting on this night. Thank you to all of you for coming. I hope it's been informative and will help you make the best judgment in your vote. But just before we wrap up, I'll just hand over to Ben very briefly.
Thank you very much, Jacob. I just want to reiterate what Jacob was saying and acknowledge the presence of all the candidates here tonight. I appreciate and talking to all of you prior. We have varying levels of expertise in terms of campaigning, levels of comfort in standing up in front of talking to people, levels of knowledge of your party's platform and policies and so on. So I really do appreciate you coming here tonight. I think this is one of the only ones, 2 or 3 of these that have actually happened in the state. So I really appreciate you all coming. And as Anthony said before as well, acknowledging the fact that you're all out here tonight. Everyone else could be doing something different, but you're all here asking some very insightful local questions. So thank you very much for coming. And thank you very much to Jacob for being the MC tonight, when he too could also be out doing many other things. As I said earlier, this has been recorded. We're going to be putting this recording out via our different platforms in the next couple of days. Please take your time, have a drink of water outside, talk to the candidates if they're going to be staying around, and also take the time to have a look at Robert's book out there called Secession, which is a great local read. Thanks very much again for coming tonight.